This is the Kodiak Survival Sword, made from 1095 in bainite. Just want to give a quick demonstration of its cutting ability. For reference, here's a standard Mora, number 1260. So rather light force. Very easy. It's Mora. Using the index finger choil on a survival sword and using this ramp right here as the main support for my thumb fits very comfortably. Very nice way the handle ramps up here. Doing the same thing. So it's in a very similar class as the number 1260 Mora with light force. Relatively decent performance. The problem is though, and this is a common problem and one of the reasons why I don't tend to like index finger choils in the blade, I'm only using about 20 pounds of force that time when I'm doing the carving. Rather light. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing mainly with my thumb, and I'm using my index finger mainly for control. So it's not comfortable, but it's not that uncomfortable either. But I'm not limited to 20 pounds. If I ramp this up, put a bit more force into it, I can easily cut straight through this with the Mora. That's somewhere around 50 pounds. Problem is, if I try to press that hard with the survival sword, I no longer can just control with my index finger. I actually had to supply the necessary counterforce to balance the blade. Now all of a sudden I have about 50 pounds of force in this area. Well, this area is only about a 1/16 of an inch wide. Even though it's chamfered, contact area is still only about a 1/16 of an inch. That means if I'm pressing with about 50 pounds of force, the contact pressure in here all of a sudden ramps up to about 800 pounds per square inch. That's slightly uncomfortable. So if I attempt to do the same thing and put about a 50-pound force press into this, I can still make the cut, no problem, but this becomes very uncomfortable, and I can do maybe 1 to 2 cuts with it. So what I have to do for really heavy cutting, of course, is use a grip down here. The problem is, now when I'm pressing with my thumb and index finger, the blade that I'm contacting with is ahead of that. That produces a leverage disadvantage, and that's very easy to calculate. All you have to do is take the ratio of the distance between your pinky and your index finger and how far the point is from your index finger on the blade. That ratio is your torque disadvantage. So for me, it's around 80%. That means I have to put 80% more force down here than I have to when I'm up right in front of the blade. So to make this comfortable, when I have to go back here, I have to put almost twice as much force into it, and you can see I didn't quite get the cut made because it's not that easy to put 100 pounds of force into this. Now that's one of the reasons why I don't tend to like index finger choils on blades, because you end up with basically trying to make a handle out of something that's 1/4 of an inch wide compared to a fully radiused handle that you get on the grip. So your contact pressure tends to be very dramatic. It's okay when you're doing precise work, you know, very little force, just trying to control the blade. And that's what a lot of people tend to use them for. But generally, for larger knives, I like to have them much more flexible in use. So what I would do is take this handle and bring it all the way up, so that the handle actually came up around this area, so that when you were gripping in the index finger choil, you were still gripping around the full part of the handle. And that of course reduces the pressure down and you don't get discomfort. But again, this is called the Kodiak Survival Sword. So again, that's just my perspective. I'd bring the handle all the way up over this fully unsharpened region. Get rid of those issues. Now, one more thing, just to give a quick demonstration. This handle has a diamond checkering pattern in the G10. It's very aggressive, even more so than the texture on the solid polypropylene handles that Cold Steel puts on their machetes. That much so that you can actually use this very quickly as a wood rasp, and you can see how easily it made a notch in that piece of pine. So it isn't unlikely that some people could actually find this a bit abrasive. I don't think I'm really going to have that much of a problem with it. It's extremely secure in hand, which I like. I don't tend to use gloves a lot, so I like the extra traction. I don't think it'll be a problem, but we'll see in use. One last comment in regards to initial sharpness. The edge was shaped with a relatively coarse abrasive, and then it was hit with a buffer, and I would assume to be a soft backing because the edge has very little aggression. You can see. Now it'll still slice paper, shave, do all that stuff, but what tends to happen when you use soft abrasives to buff or strop an edge is that the abrasive wraps up around the edge. And I can demonstrate that if I was to press this into my finger like that, you can see how my finger is going to wrap up around the edge. So if you take this blade and you put it on something relatively soft and strop it back, what actually happens is the material bends up across the edge and actually rounds over the edge. That's why in general I prefer edges that are left by a hard medium such as a stone. They leave the edge truly apexed, so it will be very aggressive even at a relatively high finish. Now with the forward balance, raw power, and length of this blade, it'll annihilate smaller wood. Okay, it was way too much effort. So, with the length that this blade has, you can see it just shreds small wood like that. So I'm really looking forward to using this. Really interested to see how the 1095 does in bainite. Really interested to see about how the edge holds up durability wise. It should be exceptionally tough. And interested in a lot of aspects of how this relates to some of the other larger blades that I have that are a bit different in design, which have a similar overall heft and mass, but are a bit shorter. This is a much more, again, sort of extended profile. One small thing which is kind of nice, you can see the edge is a continuous arc, much like a parang. It's not flat, it rounds up right from the very choil and goes in a big smooth arc right to the tip. Here's some thicker wood full of nails, try to avoid them. And again, I'm going to be starting off light for a while because I want to get a feel for where the sweet spot is on the blade and how it feels sort of outside this. rather say relatively free of any nails. As expected, the penetration is really high with very little effort. This is getting polluted now. There's nails there and there. You got a free spot here. Accuracy seems to be fairly decent, it's fallen in line relatively quickly, and I think a lot of that comes from the stability of the handle. The texturing gives excellent feedback. I know exactly where the blade is in hand. It's not rotating at all. This is pretty gnarly old crap. You nail, buddy? No. Now I'm going to move back a bit just to see how that feels. Anyway, just obliterating that wood. So, overall first impressions, impact power is excellent, penetration is excellent, control, feedback in hand, excellent. No issues with vibration or anything at all like that, or shock so far. Works very well, impacts out by the tip. Feels a bit more powerful as I work back, but I can feel the blade starting to slow down a bit. So I'm sort of thinking out around here is where I'm going to do heavier chopping, but I'll have to look at that a bit more later on. So you can see some light grasses, and that's sort of what I was talking about with the edge not having the slicing aggression that you want. It's rounded a little bit, so that's not a big issue. I'll address that later on. On stiffer vegetation though, no problem, because you're more or less chopping through them. And it has just fantastic reach, and the end of the handle has a huge prominent swell, so you have no problems whatsoever in terms of retention. And holding it down by the end of the handle, you can see the length is just massive. So it's actually that long. You can see it'll reach straight down to my boot, so I can cut relatively low to the ground without stretching or stooping, just again because of the length. I cut a lot of reclaimed wood. You can see this wood was felled quite a long time ago. A lot of it's what we call blasty. It's very, very hard. It was never properly limbed out. So you end up with pieces like this. These limbs are very hard. They're about the toughest thing you can cut with a knife, because not only are they very hard, they tend to fracture and break. So the edge twists violently as it's going through them. Especially where you get down, where you're trying to cut them off, and the edge can go through one, smash into another one, and twist around. Now I'm pretty sure the edge on this is actually strong enough to take cutting through them, and I'll have a look at that later on. But one of the nice things is the false edge will simply snap them straight off. So just reverse the knife. Looks to be fairly solid, right? Yep. No problem. There, chum, that one's for you.